We are live. Welcome to Wrestling with the Future live on YouTube, Facebook, and around the world. Tonight, grab yourself a cup of coffee. Karen McDaniel's here.
Boy, I have a reputation on
Oh, man, we're going to have fun tonight. Karen McDaniel, how the hell are you, my friend?
I've been doing great. Thank you very much.
You
It's so
are
nice
quite
to be
welcome.
with
I'm
all of you
happy to
tonight.
have you back, and you brought your friend, your buddy, your co-author, John Cosper, the man that
Listen.
Jake Hudson calls the gold standard of authorship. John Cosper is with us. John, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing well. I gotta say, I love seeing Tiny Tim on your intro there.
Well,
Yeah.
we had Tiny's manager is a dear friend of mine.
Okay,
Stephen Plim. His name is Stephen Plim. And I'll tell you, Tiny Tim was an interesting. He would have been a great wrestling personality.
Oh yeah,
He
made
really
an appearance or
would
two on
have.
Raw, but like it was, I don't remember when that was, but
He'd have
somebody
made a
smashed his
great
ukulele.
manager.
He
I
would
know.
have. He would have.
Yeah, John. He would have made a
Yeah.
great manager.
He would have made a great manager.
I love that. I love that era of comedy. I love that era of showbiz, the Laughing and Smothers Brothers and all that stuff. It just
absolutely. Well, Jammin' Jake Hudson, my producer extraordinaire, he's in the booth in Waynesboro, Mississippi. How you doing tonight, Jake?
Doing good. I've had a little bit of a rough 24 hours, but I'm here.
Yeah, well, we got Karen McDaniel and the man you called the gold standard. He's here.
The gold standard. I like that, John.
The gold standard.
Absolutely.
Did you hear that? I
heard that. I heard that.
I
appreciate it, man.
So, Karen, you and I, we're old friends from way back, and you've been on the show a bunch of times.
Yes.
And the ones and all the talking about Wahoo that we did, you never mentioned either doing a book or putting your thoughts down on paper. Why did you decide that now was the time?
Well, I didn't mention it because I didn't know how to go about it.
Okay.
And I believe it was you that introduced me or told me about John Cosper, and I contacted him. And if it was not, I mean, this would not have happened if it wasn't for him. I mean, I can hook you up with all the people to talk to. I can write down stories that I had, but he is an author. You know what I'm saying? He's a true writer. He knows how to portray the story and make it all sound the way it's supposed to sound, to come across as each person said it. And I told him in the beginning, the first thing I said is that I didn't want it to just be an autobiography. I wanted it to be people who were still around or people who had said things about him in quotes and stories so we could all read what people really thought of him.
It's
we don't have
interesting
him to
of you to
speak
say that. It's because I have a piece of clip I'm going to play, a film clip I'm going to play later in the show. It's interesting what people thought of Wahoo.
Okay.
He was a really, in many ways, the guy that really was never a heel in his life. And he really wasn't. Only one time was he ever really booed, and that was in a match with not Tully Blanchard, with Magnum TA, and they were both baby faces at the time.
Yeah,
but for a guy that was never a heel,
now he was a heel one time. Let me correct you.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
He and Tully were tag team heels.
Yes.
They were the awesome twosome. And he would tell me, "Oh my God, I hate this. I can't stand all my fans hollering at me and screaming at me."
Yeah.
He said, "I hate this." He absolutely hated it. But
and you and I actually spoke about that before, remember?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because a guy that was just so beloved, it's interesting that he was also very divisive. You either loved him or you didn't. My question for John Cosper and co-authoring the book, did you find Wahoo made an interesting character study? Was there much more to him than met the eye, John?
What struck me over time, it really was over the summer. It was actually when I was at the George Stragos Luthez Hall of Fame weekend over the summer, is when you bring up Wahoo, you get one of two reactions from somebody from that age. The first reaction is, "Did you know Wahoo?" And it's like, no, I never met Wahoo. Second reaction is, did you know Wahoo? And they get this big grin on their face. And they're like, yeah. I knew Wahoo.
Yeah.
I got that from James Beard. I got that from Joe Malenko. I got that from Rick McCord. It just actually watching Joe and Rick both simultaneously get the smile and start out, yep. We have Wahoo stories. So he's a guy who's beloved. He's well remembered. And it would have been interesting to listen to somebody who had a beef with him, certainly. But I mean, everybody has a story. And it was the fun part was finding – get the different angle of the stories that have been told multiple times, get the different angles on them, but also get the stories that nobody else had heard other than one or two people.
Yeah.
Well, John, here's something. I don't know if you consider this, but in writing the book, you extract different traits, to contact, connect with your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Things that they can identify with. What was the one? If you had to pick maybe one or two, the one or two most identifiable things about Wahoo that connected either with people in general or with his fans, and that maybe be an interesting question for you and Karen to answer. But I'll go with you first, John.
Yeah, I think probably the number one, and this goes back to when I worked on Tracy Smothers' book, and he told the story that I went ahead and put in Wahoo's book as well, was just Wahoo was a guy who, in a time when, all the veterans were all about hazing the younger guys and this and that. He didn't really go for taking advantage of the young guys. He would back up the young guys when they had to. Tracy's story is he and Steve Armstrong had been working a couple nights, and it's in the, I can't remember which tag team they were working against, but he saw just how cut up their foreheads were. And, just the abuse they'd been taking. And that night they were in a 3-on-3, and it was Wahoo along with Steve and Tracy against these two guys plus Bill Dundee. And Wahoo got in the ring with those. And he just messed those two guys up, just to pay back for what they had done to Tracy and Steve. I think that was the number one thing, was he was the guy who was willing to stand up for the little guy. There's a Tony Atlas story in the book about how Wahoo got him his first pair of boots and got him his first bag. Just a very giving and caring guy.
That story Tony Atlas told, I was crying at the end of it. It made me cry.
Yeah,
it made me cry because it was so. He was carrying his stuff around in a paper bag, and Wahoo told him to leave it there.
Well, I tell you what, John, you touched on something that now is. And let me officially welcome back to the show, Mike Messier, filmmaker, director, actor, producer, award-winning filmmaker, I should say. Mike, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Angelo. Can you hear me okay?
Getting himself together. Yes, welcome. I want to play a film clip, a piece of film, and it segues right into what John Cosper and Karen are just talking about right now. So take a
The Wahoo thing. Oh, the Wahoo. Wahoo beat me so hard, beat me so many times. And finally one day, I had just had it. I hauled off and hit Wahoo as hard as I could in his face. And I knocked him down. And he got up and he shook his head. And then we finished the match. But, I mean, he was brutalizing me. So I always told people that Wahoo made me tough. He beat me tough. So he made me tough. He walked by me one time and to my wife, Julie, and goes, this is after the thing where I knocked him out. I didn't knock him out. I knocked him on his knees, but he was shaking his head. He goes, he didn't say it to me. He goes, I just want to tell you that your husband's a hell of a man. And he walked on. He was still stiff the next night, but it was a little different.
Professional football player.
Well, I wrestled the first year I was playing football. I wrestled in 1960 was my first year, and I wrestled a half a year, and I played football half a year. And every year I made more and more money in the off season, and finally at the end I was making probably 2.5 times more money wrestling than I was playing football.
McDaniel was an outspoken player who fought for his rights. Back in 1965, players were making as little as $12,000 per year. And for Wahoo, that just wasn't enough.
When you got something ace in the hole. It's easy to say if you don't get more money, I'll go and wrestle, because I was making more money wrestling. And where a lot of guys, didn't have jobs, and they went home and worked at odd jobs off season. And, they tended to have football to make a living, and that's the way they, and they were a little timid about saying anything. You'd be surprised at what a man like me would do for.
He could do it all. He ran. He played football. And what a great fucking professional wrestler, a legitimate tough guy too. So,
sportsman is really what you'd have to
call
him.
Yeah.
Wow. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, what do I think of it? Just to get to see him and to hear his voice just makes me shiver. He was so profound. He was so honest to everybody and about everything. He didn't mean to hurt people's feelings when he was honest, but he was honest,
Oh God, yeah.
And that's what, to me, and it's like I've told you over and over, and John too, wrestling was his business. He looked at it as a business, thought of it as a business.
Mm-hmm.
And when he left there, let's go play golf, let's go fishing. It wasn't his whole life.
Exactly.
And so many of the other guys and so many of the young people, it's all they have. And I think in a way that's so sad, because he had his outlet, so he wasn't giving up his hobbies for nobody.
Sure. You heard him say in that clip, Karen, that he made upwards of 2.5 times the amount of money wrestling than he did playing football.
His biggest year in football was for the New York Jets. He made $18,000. And that was his biggest year.
That he was making almost 3 times that amount wrestling.
Well, that was his big argument, was they were beginning to bring in these college players that they really didn't know if they were going to work out or not, and giving them these contracts. And I'm going, wow, that's some thinking ahead.
Right.
And it's just
Mike
like
Messier. Questions for John Cosper and Karen McDaniel.
John, well, I've spoken with Karen before, and she might remembers my anecdote that I actually bought a green wrestling mask from Wahoo McDaniel back in 1994 in Greensboro, when Wahoo was doing, Greensboro, North Carolina. Wahoo.
I remember that story, Mikey.
Well, Wahoo was. I was just thinking about Wahoo's heel turn in 1984 when he kind of teamed up with Tully Blanchard in the Mid-Atlantic area and went up against Ric Flair and Tully. And just on a personal level, did Wahoo ever speak about I think he had about an 8-month tenure as a heel. Did he ever talk about that? Did he enjoy it? Because some of the wrestlers say they like being a heel, but Wahoo was such a likable guy, but I could see him kind of tapping into that dark side of his own personality and being a hard ass with guys too. Did he ever speak about his time with you, about when he was a heel?
Yeah, we kind of brought that up before you got on, just briefly. He hated.
We already asked that question.
Not like the fans yelling, and he wasn't used to that. He had never had that. He's kind of a babyface heel anyway in his own right, but the fans loved it, and that was hard for him. But Tully made it. Tully made it easy, because Tully is such a perfect heel. You could have not ever gotten a better heel than Tully.
Oh my God, please!
Right. Unbelievably, and
that man was born to be a heel.
Yes, and
yes,
he
was. Ask his father, Joe Blanchard.
Look at his daughter. If you've ever seen her work heel, she's
brother, she's brutal.
She's got it. She's phenomenal.
That girl's brutal.
Yeah. I think she's one of the best in the world, and I'm glad
she really is, and she needs to get the hell out of Impact, for crying out loud.
She's not working with Impact anymore.
She's with I think she's with WOW right now, Women of Wrestling.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah, WOW is back.
Oh, I wish she'd go to AEW with her dad. I wish she'd go over there.
I think that's in the works, to be honest with you, Karen.
Well, I hope so. That would be.
I think she's got some relationship rebuilding after what happened and everything like that. But She's way too young to be done, and she's way too talented to be done.
Yeah.
Oh my God, sure.
But
Karen, when you decided that you were going to put this book together, and okay, and you found out, okay, this is how I'm going to go about it. There were a couple of names that came your way. John Cosper was one. But no matter what the name was, there was one thing that had to happen. You had to trust someone with your story. Moreover, you had to trust someone with this personal piece of your life.
oh, I trusted.
Was it easy for you to trust John with that, with your heart and soul? You're talking about your husband here. This is
all I had to do is talk to him on the phone. I knew I was good to go. I knew he had my, he had it for me. I knew. All I had to do was talk to him on the phone. It was just easy.
And John, then the contrary question is, were you nervous about taking on such a larger than life character?
I mean, Wahoo is definitely one that I took very seriously and wanted to do right. But it's kind of my mission statement and my purpose with writing my books is, I've got one client when I work on a book, and it's either the person that I'm writing about or it's their family. When I worked on Chris Candido's book, Johnny Candido and his parents were the folks I wanted to please. When I worked on this one, Karen was the one who needed to be happy and sign off on it. When I worked on Tracy Smothers' book, he was the guy whose opinion that mattered most to me. So it's telling their stories and the way they want them told and the way they want them honored. And Karen was great to work with. And I mean, certainly, I mean, this is, I'm very well aware a lot of people followed Wahoo and still love Wahoo. And I wanted to make sure we told the story right. We wanted to get things right. And I ran it by a couple of fact checkers too, before I ran it through my proofreaders. And, it's just
fact checkers. There's a hot button. There's a hot button.
Yeah.
Fact checkers.
So,
you should have ran it by Jam and Jake Hudson. This guy, Jake, you got a question for Karen or John?
I actually have a couple questions, but I got something to say first.
Go ahead.
I saw some of the matches that Wahoo had with Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, and I think it's AWA. I forget if it's AWA or another company, but it was on. They showed reruns of it on ESPN Classic, if you remember that station.
Mm-hmm. AWA, I think, was on there.
Yeah. So my question is for John Cosper. Who would you like to do? Who in the future? Who you like to do a book for?
Gosh, I'll always say my number one guy that I always loved watching as a kid and would love to work with would be Kevin Von Erich. I know that he's probably told his family story more than enough, and he's done talking about it. But I certainly would love to work with him. There's a number of folks. Ricky Morton's got a heck of a story to tell. He's going to be a great book.
Great picture for that story.
Brother, you could write a book just from the 2 days that Ricky and Robert stayed with me at my house. That was.
I've been talking to Victoria's been getting me in touch with a number of other ladies as well. Leilani Kai is one I'd certainly be interested in working with, and quite a few. But and I'll be honest with you, there's a little project I'm kind of just in the very beginning stages of right now. I've done some historical bios, the Black Panther Jim Mitchell and Elvira Snodgrass. And what I'm going to do with my next one, because Jim Mitchell's book has done really well, and Elvira not just made people take chances on, but I'm combining 4 of them into one book, and the 4 that I'm looking at are Wee Willie Davis, Mars Bennett, who had been a circus wrestler before she became a wrestler.
Oh yeah,
was in the circus. Harold Sakata, Tosh Togo, who of course was Oddjob in Goldfinger, and Tor Johnson, who the great movie star and also the super Swedish.
Tor Johnson is amazing. Watch him in Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Oh, I love that movie. I absolutely.
Mike Messier, Mike Messier, you're the resident film guy. Let's talk about Tor Johnson's acting ability.
A lot of these wrestlers, especially a guy like Tor, they have such a physical presence, and especially the pre-pay-per-view wrestling. The wrestlers play to the back row is the way that I interpreted it, because if you were getting 10 or 20,000 people into an arena, you want not only the person in the first row or the front row to enjoy the match, but you want the person in the back row. So these wrestlers, especially the bigger guys like Tor, they just learn to be so powerful with their presence, and that can transcend. Like Professor Toru Tanaka did some films as well, and some of these guys before The Rock became the number one box office attraction, there was a lot of wrestlers doing movies. We think of Roddy Piper as being a pioneer, and that's true, but a lot of these guys were character actors and did tremendous work. So I think it's great. And what would be an interesting book, John? Maybe I would team up with you and Angelo on this. Would be a book about wrestlers in movies.
Oh, absolutely,
like
yeah.
these character actors. That would be a fascinating book. And if you could get some good pictures from that. And I'm thinking of who was the guy that worked with Ed Wood that George Steele played in the film version with Johnny Depp. That's Tor.
Yeah,
That's
Tor
exactly
Johnson.
what we're talking about. So, I mean, you would have such a lineage from Tor to George the Animal Steele playing Tor. That's very meta.
Sure.
And Professor Toru Tanaka and all these guys would be very fast. I think Toru Tanaka did an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Running Man, if I'm not mistaken. I could be
Sure
wrong.
did.
But that's what I'm thinking.
Interestingly enough,
A lot of
and-
great wrestlers in movies.
Yeah, and John, you'll probably remember this. The French Angel, I believe he called himself, was
Maurice
a guy who he was the number one Halloween mask for years and years on end.
That was Tor Johnson.
Yes. Oh,
yeah,
was
that was Tor. Now Maurice
Oh,
Tillet,
okay.
the guy you're thinking of, French Angel, he was pretty much the model for Shrek. If you look at his face and everything. But yeah, Tor. I was actually on eBay the other day, and there was a 1977 Don Post Tor Johnson mask for sale.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Karen, question for you. You've often said to me,
I gotta say something right now.
"Oh, go ahead."
Say something to me about us women talking.
Yes, ma'am.
Y'all haven't shut up. I haven't been able to get a word in edgewise.
This is the reason why I work with him every week, and he does this every week. He won't let me get a word in edgewise. So
I'm sitting here thinking, and he just got through saying me and Carol Snuka and Barbara Goodish, and we were talking, and they just had to sit back, and I'm just sitting back going,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he does that all the time. He sometimes he won't let me get an edge where I'm trying to talk to him off camera, and sometimes he interrupts and says something smart. By the way, I just had to block somebody, Angela. I just had to block somebody because they just came in acting like
that's fine.
Ignoramuses.
That's fine. So, Karen,
we need to get him a shot collar or something.
I have a question for you, Karen. You've often said Wahoo was the same kind of guy in the ring as he was outside the ring.
He was.
And I never asked you this. I just thought about it as we were talking. Did any of the boys resent Wahoo for being like just Wahoo?
No, and John talks about this in the book also, is the fact that when he went to the ring, he was Wahoo McDaniel. That's who he was. And he acted the same way in the ring as he did. I mean, he really was himself. He wasn't some cartoon character. He wasn't some made up somebody. He was Wahoo McDaniel. Now, on that side of it, yes, that's who he was. And it's like I've said several times, if you didn't sell, he made you sell. Because
just listen to Greg Valentine tell that story.
Right. That was his business.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't that he was mean. It was just, we're doing business right now.
Yeah, sure.
Mike,
questions for...
So I think Kelvin Sullivan's first comment to me when I asked him about Wahoo was, I'm still hurting from Wahoo.
Yeah. Mikey, questions for John or Karen?
Well, maybe for both. And I just, maybe I think about the wrestling business of that era, the 70s and the 80s. For me, that was the best time for pro wrestling, and Wahoo was a big part of that. I think of a story, and I wonder if Wahoo ever commented on it, that the entire legacy of Chief Jay Strongbow was because the WWF at the time could not control or break the spirit of Wahoo McDaniel. Because they could not control or break the spirit of Wahoo, they had to create a fabrication of a Native American wrestler, and no disrespect to him because he had a lot of fans, but Jay Scarpa was not the true. He was a Wahoo McDaniel wannabe. I hate to say it, but it's true.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
He was
Did you ever comment
Italian.
on that? Yeah, he was, and there's nothing wrong with Jay Scarpa as a human being, and I know he contributed a lot to pro wrestling. But as far as the character of Chief Jay, that was really it was a spin-off or a facsimile, a wish version, as the kids would say, of Wahoo McDaniel. And I'm just wondering, Karen and John, because Wahoo seemed like I'm guessing he wouldn't care, or even since imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, maybe he saw it like that. But did he ever have any jokingly things to say? Did he ever snicker at Chief Jay, or did he ever comment, or did he just not have much to say about it?
Good question.
Say about he really didn't have anything to say about anybody except who he was going to wrestle that night and that they better work. I mean,
That makes sense.
Really didn't have anything to say. If he said something about anybody, it was directly to them and in the dressing room or on the phone. And as I said, when he was a booker, he talked very blunt. This is what it's going to be. This is what we're going to do, and this is what's going to be the best for you.
Yeah. John, was there any comparative? How do I want to say this? Were there any
Indian
comparisons drawn between Jay Strongbow and Wahoo McDaniel? That as you're writing the book, did you come across anything?
Not really.
Or from a fan, perhaps.
Say that the two of them had crossed paths, early in both of their careers when Joe was still Joe Scarpa. He had his dispute over money, of course, with WWF, and that's why he walked out and no longer went and worked with them, and they ended up inventing Chief Jay Strongbow. But as Karen said, it was never really anything where he had a beef with it. I think it was actually when I was working with Princess Victoria and we were talking about it, and the fact that he had a headdress that was made by Native Americans and everything like that. That just showed that they had his support, or he had their support, and that they felt honored by the way he had portrayed the character. And the two of them made an appearance together. I think it was his only appearance on actual WWE television. It was an episode with Tatanka, where they were presenting him with the ceremonial headdress, and
he was on Raw. That's the only time he was wrong. Now he worked with his dad, but he never worked for Vince.
Yeah. Karen, what's the one thing about Wahoo that people might be surprised to find out in reading this book?
That he was a sweet, caring man, and I don't want to give away anything, but there's a babysitter story in there that's really cute.
I know the babysitter story.
You will realize that this is really a caring, humbling, sweet man. And he was, he was all kind of people. He was wild and crazy, and so you read some, and I even read them, and I know them, and I go, "Oh my God!" If somebody reads it, they're gonna think he was a wild man, a nut. Well, he was. That was just him.
Well, I mean, after all, Karen, he was a wrestler. Let's be honest. They're not. They're not all put together too tight sometimes.
That way,
John, in writing the book,
am I not from your going through with his mother's tales, his sister's tales? He was like that from the beginning. He didn't change.
Yeah, he was a guy. Guys do dumb things, and Wahoo was a little more. I mean, he would have fit in right with Johnny Knoxville and his crew. I mean,
exactly.
I'm Wahoo McDaniel. I'm going to drink a quarter motor oil so I can go on a date with a girl tonight. $50.
Well, exactly. Well, that's kind of where I want to go with you, John, in the next line of questioning about putting a book together. There's a lot of you're being trusted with someone's life story. Okay, and that's like an honor, and a lot of people consider that an honor that someone would trust you to tell this story the right way.
I'm proud. That's all I can say.
And John did a hell of a job. But here's the question, though, and a writer, every writer and we've had a lot of authors on this show. I mean, a lot of them, and Mike Messier can attest to that fact. We've had a lot of authors on this show, and everybody has their own little process of deciphering and disseminating information and taking that separate information and putting it together so that it's cohesive. It tells a story, grabs your attention, maybe has you up on your feet a little bit, back in the chair, maybe has you laugh, maybe has you cry. It's supposed to evoke all these emotions, right?
Mhm.
What process do you utilize to pull all of that out?
In a way, it's a lot like putting together a big jigsaw puzzle. When you start in on something like that, I mean, obviously the first stories I heard about Wahoo were things like, him running, 34 miles from Norman to Chickasha, Oklahoma on a bet, drinking the motor oil. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many people told me about, when he would make a tackle, for the New York Jets, they would say tackle by who, and they would yell like Wahoo.
Wahoo.
So you start recording, what you get, and basically just start writing everything down. And then at a certain point, you gotta go back and you gotta start trying to figure out, okay, what goes where and everything. For a lot of books in the past, I would utilize a resource like wrestlingdata.com, where I can go and I can pull kind of basically a career storyline of following where they're at. Wrestling data is maybe 80-90% accurate. There's a lot of times that there's erroneous, especially with some of the older wrestlers. It can be a little iffy. With this particular one, there was the record book that Mark James and Greg Grogg had put together.
Mm-hmm.
So that was open and on my desk for quite a bit when I was trying to figure out, okay, here's where this happened, here's where this happened.
Yeah.
And it was as the more I went along and everything like that, there were stories that, there were a couple of chapters where we kind of grouped some things together about Wahoo doing good by the boys, or Wahoo getting sued by the fans, or things like that. But a lot of those stories kind of found their way into the narrative ultimately, because one of them being the Bobby Heenan story about when he was Wahoo was under a mask and Bobby had tied it to the turnbuckle, and found exactly where that was supposed to go. So I mean, it's certainly a challenge, but again, you're just kind of gathering stories, you're recording interviews with people. I went through a shoot interview Wahoo had done. Karen and I had a number of phone calls and everything, and getting everything on audio or getting everything down in writing, and then it's just going back and having the process of trying to figure out the best way to tell the narrative.
And
John, how far into Wahoo's football career did you delve into?
I mean, we covered it year by year. We talked about his time in Oklahoma and how things went there. A lot of the college stories and everything like that, hanging out in the wrestling room. Actually, we went back even further than that. We got some high school stories because I got to talk to one of his high school buddies, a guy named Jerry Calloway, who ended up becoming a director of photography in Hollywood and worked on Dances with Wolves. Was a buddy of his way back then.
God.
Had stories from his sisters, but he played baseball. His baseball coach was George H.W. Bush. So we got some tales about that. And, we talked about his football career. And some of the, stories came from some of the oddest sources, but we got great tales about, the years that he was playing football, the years that he was with the Dolphins and with the Jets. And he was actually part of that Broncos team that wore those hideous vertical striped brown and yellow socks. He was there the second year, the last year of those uniforms. So he was there for the uniform burning as well when they switched over to the blue and orange. But we did cover his career. It was kind of for a while I was like, well, I don't want to just cover football and then go into wrestling, but they just overlapped. So I mean, we pretty much just covered his wrestling and his football career simultaneously.
Throw it over to Mike Messier. Mikey, I'll throw it to you, and then you toss it to Jakey when you're done.
This conversation's just reminding me of some great Wahoo McDaniel matches that maybe John and Karen can chime in after I list some of them. But I'm just thinking of Wahoo's work at the early Starcades. At the first Starcade, I think it was Wahoo McDaniel and Mark Youngblood teamed up against Dick Slater and Cowboy Bob Orton, Randy Orton's father. And they had a great tag team match, which was one of the early matches on the show, but it kind of stole the undercard of that show, to be honest with you. And then Starcade 84, Wahoo defended the U.S. title against superstar Billy Graham, which was kind of in the middle of Wahoo's heel turn. It was kind of an unusual heel versus heel U.S. title match, I think. And then in 85, he had a real bloodbath with Wahoo, with Manny Fernandez, the Raging Bull. Am I getting that right? Was that 85? No, that was Manny versus Abdullah Butcher. Wahoo teamed with Billy Jack Haynes against Ole and Arn Anderson in a really great tag team match. And then Wahoo beat Ravishing Rick Rude in a strap match at Starcade 86. So, I mean, this guy if you're a young wrestling fan watching this show and you're not that familiar with Wahoo's wrestling work, get the book by John and Karen. But you can watch these matches. They're easily found on the WWE Network or YouTube or anything else. I just had to put over Wahoo's wrestling ability because he was such a great wrestler and he brought legitimacy to those matches, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And some of the guys today, as the flips and everything are, they couldn't do the legitimate tough guy stuff that a Wahoo and a Manny Fernandez could do. And I don't know if Karen or John has any comments on those Starcades. Did Wahoo ever talk about his Starcade matches with you, Karen?
I was there selling stuff. We'd have extra. See, because Wahoo was the only when he went to Mid Atlantic, he made a deal. The only way he'd come there is if he could sell gimmicks, and the Crockett's didn't allow anybody to sell gimmicks. That they sold their own pictures and stuff, but that was Wahoo's deal. Period.
Yeah.
So we had pictures, all kind of stuff printed. I shipped them on the bus to all the different places that the Starcade was pay-per-viewed. Did they call it pay-per-view?
It was closed circuit TV until
closed
87.
circuit. Yeah.
Yeah. It was on a big screen. You had to go to the arena to see it.
Oh yeah.
Closed circuit. Yeah.
Closed circuit. Remember them days?
Yeah. So I sent packages and I had people to pick them up at the bus station. That we made more money that night selling gimmicks than he did wrestling, just about, because they were every city that put the arcade in, that's where. So really during Starcade, my main concern was getting the paraphernalia out to get it sold and bring the cash in the door.
Smart.
It's all business.
That's punk rock right there. I mean, that's do it yourself. That's great.
Yeah.
I do know there was the one night he and Manny were on. I think they weren't on second or third to last, and it was the night of the Lawler. Was it Kerry Von Erich? Yeah,
Super Clash 3.
And nobody could decide who was going to go over, and he and Manny were like, well, you know what? We're just going to go out there and show them up, and they just went out there and had a bloodbath. They were like they were ready to kill Lawler. They were ready to kill Von Erich. It's like, let's just take it out on each other.
Yeah, there was.
Oh man.
I mean, you can't even imagine any of that now. But I'll just give you an example about the younger people now that are watching all of that on YouTube. They're not necessarily watching the new stuff as much as they're going back and watching YouTube. And an example, and this is the cutest example. This past summer, I was talking to Missy Hyatt up at the Gathering in Charlotte, and she said, "Karen, this guy came up to me and he was talking about when I got the water poured on me and so in 1991 at such and such a match." And she said, I looked at him and I thought, you weren't even born in 1991. And I said, that's what we were actually talking about, is how all the young people are going back and seeing these people of the 80s on
comment.
That's wrestling.
We have Leon Barfield said, I met Wahoo at the TBS studio in '85, and it was very nice to me. Wow. I'd be interested to find out how that meeting took place. Unless maybe Leon worked at the studio at the time. Was that, let's talk about that a little bit. And I don't know how much you want to give away now, Karen, but because I know you want to sell books. But how much input did Wahoo either elicit from fans or seek out as far as the nature of his character? He was always, you said he was always, Wahoo was always Wahoo. But every performer has that little thing that connects them to people. Did Wahoo purposely or deliberately maintain, how do I want to say this? Did he maintain his individuality purposefully so as not to convolute it with a character, so to speak? And what was it that connected people to him? I guess that's really what I'm getting to. What was it that connected people to Wahoo?
You hit the nail on the head. They were all connected to him. They all looked up to him. They all respected him. Fans, guys, the boys, everybody did, because he walked out with a persona like nobody else.
I'm telling you.
Believe who I am. And he, like I said, he didn't have to dress up in some costume or something. He was just him. He walked around with his head held high, played golf with Lee Trevino and and he knew he was good, and he knew he could do any of it except play basketball.
Yeah.
And
Right? Yeah, basketball, right?
he knew he was good at it. So if you're good at something, you're good, it's easy to walk out there and be that, that person that everybody likes and wants to be.
And Wahoo connected with fans before he was ever in a wrestling ring. He was, if you go back, there's a really wonderful book called Going Long. It's the history of the AFL. That it's kind of an oral history, and there were a lot of great players in the AFL. There's a lot of them that are in the Hall of Fame. Wahoo was never an all-star in the AFL, and he's not in the Hall of Fame. Did not have a Hall of Fame career. But when you talk about the AFL, you can't talk about the AFL without talking about Wahoo McDaniel. Nope. He was one of the most talked about. He was one of the most recognized. He was one of the most remembered players from that 10 years that the league was in existence.
And as winning the Super Bowl or anything, he was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. They would win the year after he left.
Yeah.
In terms of wrestling of recent years, the name Haku comes up with being a tough as nails guy. Everybody says Haku he's the guy you don't want to mess with.
Mm-hmm.
But that's now. Back in the day, there was a guy named Wahoo McDaniel you definitely didn't want to piss off. You didn't want to get on. Karen's shaking her head.
No, you didn't.
She knows where I'm going with this question. So let's talk about those times, Karen, when Wahoo lost his cool, let's say. And John will follow up with any good stories in the book.
There were times if some guy had come to the house, say, to deliver a TV, and there'd been, I didn't really know Wahoo well enough to maybe not say, this guy said this and he did this, and then Wahoo would call him up and blast him out. I learned quickly there were certain things I didn't need to express to him because he'd defend me. He would stand up and stand out. But just like, the Harris Teeter in Wendy and Charlotte, North Carolina is a grocery store. And some guy, this has been in papers and stuff, he was trying to back up. Wahoo was trying to pull up, and they ended up into a little mouthing altercation. And the guy threw a bag of cold frozen peas at him, and Wahoo put his head through the bicycle rack.
Ooh.
And I call, it's on the thing. A wrestler is on the news. A wrestler was rioting at the Harris Teeter on Providence Road. So,
oh my God,
that was a normal day. That was
Go ahead, John.
As I say, Ricky Morton tells the famous story about the incident in Bennigan's and
God,
the nachos that he dumped on the girl he got sued over.
God.
I will say the one guy Wahoo did not mess with was Karen, and there's a number of good stories in the book about that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Well, I know Karen. I can imagine.
Look, in the beginning, I was
oh shit,
kind of mirror, I guess you might say. Anyway, I would chase him out to the car to give him a kiss, goodbye, or a hug. His mom had told me, "You are so loving," and he's not. Well, he just wasn't affectionate, But I would chase him out in the car, and then if I didn't hear from him, I'd be all boo-hoo, and if he got mad at me, he would pout and not talk to me for a couple of days. And this went on, in the youthful part of our marriage for the first couple of years. And then I figured it all out, And finally, one time I said to him, you can do all that pout and not talk to me all you want to. I don't care. He never.
I have a real hard problem thinking of Wahoo McDaniel pouting at anything.
Well, but
for the record, let me say
he would get mad at me and he could just not speak 2 days, just not speak to me. And so finally I said, you can do all that not speaking to me and all you want to. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't bother me at all. He never did it again. It was like if
That's
you stood
funny.
up to him for whatever he had, your side of the story
Yeah.
he could evaluate and say, oh, well, she's probably right. That is kind of stupid. Or
Interesting. I'll tell you what, Jam and Jake, you got any questions before we throw open the lines for questions and comments from our audience?
I actually wanted to ask John Cosper a question. You
Go
brought
for it,
up
sure.
you brought up Kevin Sullivan. Did you see his appearances on the McDodge show on National Geographic?
I did not know.
He did a few episodes on the show I think the Legend of McDodge.
Okay.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, yeah, I'll check it out.
No idea about that.
And I also want to say that number one, John Cosper is the gold standard in wrestling books.
Absolutely.
Because here's the thing. Because when you talk about wrestling biography books, 9 out of 10 of those books is done by John Cosper.
I would disagree with that. Scott Teal, I think, is the gold standard, and he is the master that we're all following after. But there's so many great writers out there. Ian Douglas has done some phenomenal books. Kenny Casanova. I should stop listing right now.
I love
I'm going
Kenny.
to drop a lot. Greg Oliver. Jason Presley does great work. There's just a lot of great wrestling historians. A lot of guys doing research, supporting each other, and it's a really great community, really supportive community, and
absolutely
just a lot of really great guys that just trying to help. We got a late start. Wrestling didn't really start getting journalistic, historical coverage, I guess, until probably Mick Foley and Have a Nice Day was kind of the turning point for that. There have been biographers and historians for football and baseball and basketball and even hockey since the beginning.
Yeah.
So we're kind of playing catch up, and
that's a really interesting thing. That can I segue into that with you, John?
Sure.
And then I want Mike Messier to hop in, piggyback off me. Back in the early 60s, there were a number of wrestling books out by people like Ed Strangler Lewis and Maurice Tillett and people like that. These so-called autobiographies. Basically, what they were essentially kayfabe books. They were workbooks, okay?
Like Mullah's autobiography.
Yeah, well, and that's where I want to go with this. So how important was it for you, and maybe Karen too, how important was it not to tell the stuff that was already publicly known?
Well, I mean, there were certain stories. If you're going to tell Wahoo's story, you have to include those tales.
Sure.
Again, running from Norman to Chickasha, drinking the motor oil, and having his name on the back of the jersey, and the fans. You have to. If you're not telling those stories, you're not telling the full story of Wahoo. But I think it's just important to go deeper and to tell the story of the whole man. And I think the Norman and Chickasha story, there were 3 or 4 different versions. We put them all in there just so people could, hear just from different viewpoints and what different people remember of them.
Yeah.
I love the fact that there were more versions of the story, but I've heard so many versions of the story,
Well, like I'll give you a perfect example. I knew the babysitter story, but I heard like 3 versions of the babysitter story.
Oh.
So now when I get, because I can't tip the hat, I want people to buy the book. I know.
They're not.
Because I'm old.
My Louisville book, there's 3 different versions of events as to how Dick the Bruiser took over Indianapolis and Louisville from Jim Barnett, So,
yeah. I heard a couple of them myself too, John.
Yeah. and all of them are good stories,
Yeah. Oh man, Mikey Messier, go for it, brother.
Well, I think about the wrestling books, and one that comes to mind is Arn Anderson's book Forever, which was kind of like half kayfabe, half shoot. And I for some reason I love that book because a lot of people don't like it, but I mean I think Arn told some great stories, and like I said earlier, he was a great opponent for Wahoo McDaniel. But going to your books, John, I guess I wonder And if this hasn't been done yet, I guess I'd volunteer my own services or talk to you about it. But the audio versions, have you done audio versions of your wrestling books? Because there's a great market for Audible and audio books. I like to listen to audio books in my car when I'm driving. And I think a lot of people in this day and age prefer audio books versus sitting down and reading, because you can drive or you can do other things when you're listening to an audio book. Has that have you thought about the audio versions of Wahoo's book or other of your books?
I've definitely thought about it, and just have never pursued it, just because of the monetary considerations of getting it done and the time commitment. Johnny Candido has looked into. He's got some friends that have some recording studios, and looked into the possibility of recording Chris Candido's book. So that one certainly is is a possibility. Hey, get in touch with me, Mike. I would certainly be willing to talk with you more. I'm the kind of guy. I like a book in my hands. I do sometimes read an ebook on Kindle, and I've whenever I get a free trial of Audible, I always get it, because there's really fun stuff you can't find anywhere else on Audible. This past fall, I listened to, basically it was not a dramatization, but it was an audio book of Dracula, where they had different actors reading the characters, and you had Tim Curry and what's his name? Alan Cumming was Dr. Seward, and then Tim Curry was Van Helsing, and it was just wonderful to listen to. So I certainly do understand the appeal, and I've enjoyed it myself, and I'm certainly open to it. I like your idea about the movie book.
Yes, I think.
As I say, I like your idea about the wrestlers.
Yeah, that'd be a good one too,
because that's one I've thought of as well.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mikey.
What was that? I'm sorry. What did you say?
Well, I guess
telling the stories, combining the stories about wrestlers who also became movie stars, right? Really more back in the 40s and 50s. And, there was a whole group.
I got information on that. You and I, if we corroborated on that,
we should talk.
Bestseller.
Well,
I've got some really cool 8x10 stills that I've collected over the years, just of Wee Willie Davis.
You would have to inform him. He wasn't even born then.
That's what the newspaper archives are for, Karen. That's some of the most dirt, right? That's some of the most fun and fascinating stuff, to go back and find, wrestlers and names and people that nobody has heard. I'll tell a story right now if you guys want. This is
I love story time.
Nobody has heard of this guy. It was in 1904 in Louisville. This guy, he appeared in the newspaper one time. At that time, Louisville hadn't seen a lot of wrestling since about the mid 1880s.
Right.
And it would still be a couple more years. A guy named George Buchel would kind of revive it in the theaters downtown. But there was wrestling. Basically, it was just going on in the bars, and a couple guys would, okay, we're going to wrestle. People would put up money and they'd bet, and whatever. And it was an African-American guy named Steve Calloway, who apparently was well known around town, was very popular and everything and was undefeated. And it was mid-July. Guy walked into the bar. And Calloway had been working a shift all day, and guy challenged him to a wrestling match. He said, all right, let's do it. They did it right there in the bar. Calloway pinned him. He won. Everybody's clapping him on the back and cheering, and all of a sudden he fell over dead.
Oh my goodness.
Right in the bar. So, and it's frustrating, because I'm like, there's a whole story about this guy. This guy had other matches.
Wow.
There were people from that time that had stories to tell, and the odds are very good. None of them were recorded, other than just one tragic ending.
I'll tell you what, I am so blessed. I am so blessed to have this show. I've had some of the greatest storytellers in wrestling on this show. Ron Fuller and Mike Messier actually got Ron Fuller for us, as a matter of fact. And Ron is a veritable plethora.
I gotta go see.
Oh my God! The stories that Ronnie can tell is just you just sit there in awe and go, tell me more. I want to hear more.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll tell you what, the one guy talking about the books that were like workbooks, kayfabe. I love Bruno Sammartino. The late living legend was an amazing guy. But John, there wasn't a single thing written in his book that he hadn't said 25 or 35,000 times before that. It was essentially everything he's already done and said that he decided to dictate to somebody to put it in a book. And Sal Carenti, who was the author of Bruno's autobiography, said, Bruno, look, they know this. Well, good, they'll know more. Here you go.
Well,
and in Bruno's defense, there, I mean, these stories need to be recorded. They need to be recorded in whether it's an audio or video or written form. They need to be recorded, and even the kayfabe stories. I mean, because you can't tell the real story of wrestling without also telling the kayfabe story.
And you know what? That's funny you say that, John, because that was the only book per se on Bruno that's dubbed an autobiography, only because Sal Carenti knew Bruno and he dictated the story to him. Jake, you got a question for John or Karen?
By the way, number one, we have Barbara Goodish is in the chat.
Oh, Barbara. Oh, yes. Get Barbara in here. Let's
Barbara, I know she's not chatting, but she dropped us a like on one of the pages.
Oh, wonderful!
But
I love
nice.
Barbara.
But
try to let's coax her into the chat room. Maybe she's got a question. Right?
By
Your link.
the way, we got a question from Wydad. This is you know who Wydad was. Sheriff Donald Lord was.
Sure.
Ron Fuller has a nice YouTube channel.
I'm not promoting Ron Fuller's YouTube channel.
Sorry, I thought that was a question. Damn it.
I like Ron, but I'm not promoting his YouTube. I'm only going to promote MikeMessier.com. That's it.
or
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks, Angela.
Mikey, questions for you. Final question.
I want to share with Karen, especially. Karen, I have a great anecdote that I don't think I told you before. It was late 1991, and my friends and I took a 4-hour road trip to see, I believe the promotion was called the Virginia Wrestling Alliance, and it was one of the first indie shows I ever went to.
Oh.
And we had never seen something like this. And I believe the guy defending the title in the main event was the guy, I think he was using a wrestler named Agent Orange. And he was a masked wrestler, and it was supposed to be him defending the title against Wahoo in an Indian strap match. But then Agent Orange, he begged for mercy, and he said, I will not defend my title against Wahoo in an Indian strap match. It'll either be a title match or a strap match. And then the fans got to vote if they wanted the strap match or the title match. And we all voted for the strap match because we wanted to see this guy get whipped with the strap, and which Wahoo proceeded to do. He won the match, of course. It's his match, the strap match. And I'm telling you, it was a great time. It was about 300 or 400, maybe I would say 400 people were packed into this high school gym. And it was just a nice memory of Wahoo. And I just, maybe real quick, did Wahoo have a vibe or tell you about what he thought about doing spot shows like indie promotions? Did he like that type of thing?
Yeah, he liked it. It kept him involved. I mean, after his kind of retirement, and he didn't work very much. It just kept him, kind of kept him alive in his business. He would go to Walmart and sign autographs. They would pay him to come to Walmart and sign autographs and take.
Really?
I mean, he liked that. He liked that because it kept him in wrestling, so to speak. It kept him doing things. I have a guy that sent me a message last night, and I want to forward it to John. He complimented our book. But he said, his name is Blackwell. He said he wished that he loved the book, but he wished that we had written more about the indie shows after the fact. And I thought, well, we would need to do that. We would need some of those indie wrestlers to help write that because it wasn't documented though. But I mean, he drew a lot of money doing that. Just a lot of times he would just go to the ring and maybe stand with somebody in the ring towards his later years, and just because Wahoo was there, So
I'd love to see somebody do the definitive book of Gorgeous George. That's a book that needs to be written. Nobody to this point, no one's really delved into the life of George Wagner, aka Gorgeous George. John, have you ever thought about maybe doing like historical perspective
on Gorgeous George?
Or people of that
generation?
Well,
I'm certainly one of his biggest rivals, the Black Panther Jim Mitchell. I wrote his autobiography a couple years ago, and actually he's somewhere behind me. Back up, right there.
It's really small. I can't see.
yeah. But I actually I had been researching him for a couple of years because I just found him a very fascinating character. Read the story in Joe Jarris's book, Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George, about the riot at the Olympic Auditorium in 1949. I posted a couple things on my blog, and then I got an email from a guy saying, "Hey, a buddy of mine bought Jim Mitchell's house in Toledo. You need to talk to him." So I got a hold of the guy. And he had bought Mitchell's house. He used to flip houses. Heard a couple of ladies talking about a house that was for sale at the bank. Went and made an offer like $12,000. It was in an older estate section in Toledo. Went and started cleaning the house out and finding wrestling posters, programs, boots. He was a Mason. Found a lot of his things from the Masons and stuff. And he had kept all this stuff. Jim Mitchell collected smoking pipes from around, like, by the thousands from around the world. He saved the entire pipe collection. So I got to lay hands on all this stuff, everything except for the pipe collection, which he still has up in Toledo. It'd be great to find a wrestling fan with a lot of money who also has a thing for pipes that could, buy it, get it to a museum or something. But I've had my hands on so much real history of Jim Mitchell, and there's actually a photo. Let me see if I can. Well, where is it? Oh, it's on the wall up here.
Oh wow! Look at that.
Yeah, you got Jim Mitchell in there, Enrique Torres, Gorgeous George. Actually, the story of that train, a fan at the Hall of Fame a couple years ago.
Wow.
I'd seen a special on the History Channel, told me what that train was. It was basically like a museum exhibit going around the country, about the history of America type of thing. A number of things I kept and recently donated to the Fraser Historical Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, which they're going to put on display. But that era fascinates me. I wrote his biography. I did one on Elvira Snodgrass, who was basically Mildred Burke's, number one rival in the 1940s. And again, Morris Bennett, Wee Willie Davis have been obsessions of mine for a long time, and stories that I would really love to tell. There's,
I'll tell you what, man, you got you got a few more books in you. John, how familiar are you with wrestling at the Louisville Gardens?
I never went, but retroactively, have learned quite a bit. Actually, my first book was A History of Louisville from 1880 all the way through the present day, and I'm in the process of here the next couple months putting out a second edition, which goes even deeper. So
I'm asking for a reason. I have a series of shows coming up. Actually, they start next week. The great venues, great wrestling venues. We're going to do Madison Square Garden, the Philadelphia Arena, the Homer Estuary Auditorium in Florida, the Sportatorium, of course, in both Florida and Texas, and, of course, the Philadelphia Spectrum. Oh, and the Olympic Auditorium in California. I would love if you feel like it, I'm inviting you back maybe to talk about Louisville Gardens if you feel like.
Certainly. I can,
Beautiful.
I would love to. I can actually tell you stories going back before the Memphis days when it was kind of the special, the once a year police shows back in the 1950s, and even go back to the 19-teens when they first started having Derby Eve shows.
You know what? See, I'm old. Karen will tell you I'm old as dirt.
There, I didn't say it that time.
I didn't say that.
Karen, I love you, darling.
I have something to say.
Whatever. No,
go ahead, Jake.
Say about. Let me say
what about? Are we going to do a show about Open Arena in Jackson, Tennessee?
Oh, all right, sure.
Because that's where they ran shows. Also, that's where Burt Prentice ran shows. Is Open Arena.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure you'll give me all the information I need. Well, here's what we're going to do, because we're actually up on our hard 8 o'clock here. about 2 minutes. Want to thank my sponsors, manscaped.com and Pepsi. It's what I like. And thank my guests, Jim and Jake Hudson, the producer. You're the best. You are the man, Jake.
Always,
Mike
always.
Messier, MikeMessier.com. John Cosper, the book is Wahoo.
Thanks, man.
And Mrs. Wahoo McDaniel, Karen McDaniel. And we are going to end this night with Wahoo McDaniel himself. But first, if you missed it, a story from Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Can I very quickly show Karen something?
Yes, sir.
Came in the mail today.
Oh,
I wrote Wahoo's book.
yay. He got
Yours
me.
is in the mail. You'll have it next week.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I want to say one thing about John Cosper.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
book, and he said, "Okay,
Greg Valentine.
what do you think? What do we need to do?" I said, "Exactly like it is. Don't change a word." And he went, "Really?" And I thought that was so humble and sweet. He went, "Really?" I said, "Don't change a word. It's perfect."
Well, I will tell you, it is a hell of a read.
I know
It's a fascinating book.
funny.
And,
It's funny.
It is funny. It is funny.
It really is. It's the kind of book, as I described it earlier. It talks to you. It touches you. It reaches. It connects with you. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. Makes you think about something. Oh, I never knew that. Tells you something. It smartens you up a little bit in some areas.
Mm-hmm. It's not boring, and I've read a lot of boring ones.
Oh my God, Karen! There's a whole, chain of bookstores full of boring books, but this ain't one of them.
And I want you to know this too. There were several people I did approach about writing the book, and they were not interested because he was deceased, and it would just be da 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 da. And I went, wait, I want to write people's words about him.
Yeah.
And John Cosper took me up on that.
And for the record, I am the person who told Karen McDaniel about John.
Tell him, please.
This would not be possible without Angelo. Thank you very much.
About you. Hey, now listen. I'm just like Wahoo. If I'm not teasing you, I don't like you.
There you go.
You know what I mean?
I hear you.
If I don't like you, I don't have anything to say.
There you go, folks. Well, let's hear from Greg Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel. And till next week, we'll see you next time, folks.
All right. Thank you, guys.
The Wahoo thing. Oh, the Wahoo. Wahoo beat me so hard, beat me so many times. And finally one day, I had just had it. I hauled off and hit Wahoo as hard as I could in his face, and I knocked him down. And he got up and he shook his head, and then we finished the match. But, he was brutalizing me. So I always told people that Wahoo made me tough. He beat me tough. So he made me tough. He walked by me one time and to my wife, Julie, and he goes, this is after the thing where I knocked him out. I didn't knock him out. I knocked him on his knees, but he was shaking his head. He goes, he didn't say it to me. He goes, I just want to tell you that your husband's a hell of a man. And he walked on. He was still stiff the next night, but it was a little different.
Professional football player.
Well, I wrestled the first year I was playing football. I wrestled in 1960 was my first year, and I wrestled a half a year, and I played football a half a year. And every year I made more and more money in the off season, and finally at the end I was making probably 2.5 times more money wrestling than I was playing football.
McDaniel was an outspoken player who fought for his rights. Back in 1965, players were making as little as $12,000 per year. And for Wahoo, that just wasn't enough.
When you got something, an ace in the hole, it's easy to say, if you don't get more money, I'll go and wrestle, because I was making more money wrestling. And where a lot of guys, didn't have jobs, and they went home and worked at odd jobs off season. And, they tended to have football to make a living, and that's where they, and they were a little timid about saying anything.
You'd be surprised at what a man like me would do for
he could do it all. He ran. He played football. And what a great fucking professional wrestler, a legitimate tough guy too. So,
sportsman is really what you'd have to call him.
Yeah,